Hi there. This time around, I'd like to talk about this book, The Road to Dien Bien Phu by Christopher Goscha, who's the history department at the University of Montreal and Quebec, that came out sort of late 2022. I'll just talk a little bit about how you could use this in your own history teaching. So it's a fantastic book. It's had rave reviews through various History Today, for example, other such sort of publications, and very timely in effect. Kind of within, we've had quite a sort of slew of titles over the last sort of few years, looking at kind of post Second World War colonialism and move towards independence. And just a few sort of areas I'd like to pick out from here that perhaps you could use in your teaching. It's why I think it's so good, just as a history book in itself, but also how to use in teaching, is the fact that it covers quite methodically different aspects of how Vietnam moved from being a colonized country into modern independent state, and how it got there. And in a sense as well, Goscha introduces this sort of notion of what is sort of Vietnam in a sense, and how its image is shaped through its experience of being colonized by the French, and also through the Second World War as well, and how it's been sort of squeezed between various powers. And that kind of comes through particularly at the beginning of the book, where he talks about this kind of archipelago of power in a sense, where Ho Chi Minh is essentially kind of holed up in the north near the border with China, and how they, for various reasons in terms of French tactics and strategy, pro-French Vietnamese forces as well, kind of splintering Ho Chi Minh's attempts to bring more cohesiveness in terms of his control over Vietnam. So this sort of what Goscha terms archipelago of power in effect is a really interesting notion. I think one that would be very useful for students in terms of them, I suppose, comprehending this shift from colonization, the impact of the Second World War, into this post-war world and the struggle for independence that he goes into in the book. And speaking of that as well, it's a particularly good part, I think, that you could kind of link into other 20th century topics such as Maoist China, is around about page here, if we have a look at page 250. So there's actually a section here that looks at what he terms the special relationship between China, Maoist China, and Ho Chi Minh's Vietnam. And that is, I found anyway, very interesting. Lots of he's clearly done a lot of work in various archives, and you can really get a sense of the sort of clandestine, I suppose, contact between the Vietnamese and Chinese communists at the time, and trying to establish links, and how, with the impact, the consequences of the Korean War after that, China kind of wholeheartedly kind of supporting this sort of incipient, I suppose, Vietnamese communist movement. And he really, it's a very useful part. It really kind of provides a lot of detail in terms of how this actually comes about, the sort of supplies, the personnel, and also going back to even sort of post First World War as well, in terms of high up Vietnamese officials, how they've been sort of trained in Guangzhou in southern China as well. So it's a really useful part to see not only the issues here in Vietnam that you can focus in on, but also more broadly within Southeast and East Asia as well, and how this transition and sort of regional shift to independence is sort of playing out. So it's a really interesting part, and that would be one that I think would be very useful to kind of look at, because a lot of teachers, for example, look at the Cold War, especially in light consequences of the Second World War. So this would be a really useful section to kind of dip into and extract various parts to sort of use with students in the classroom, to really look at the changing dynamic and the shifting dynamic. And I suppose it puts much more kind of agency within this region as well, which is what I really like about the book. Well, again, I suppose is a sort of the purpose of the book in a sense as well. But you really get much more of a Vietnamese perspective in terms of actually bringing about. So it really sort of brings about a much more historical agency, I feel, with East Asian players, if you like. So I think an excellent book to use within the classroom on that. Thanks.